Today at ShopDap.com, we talk about everything you need to know about all-wheel drive swapping a car. All-wheel drive swapping a car is awesome, but it requires a good amount of skill and a bunch of money to execute properly. If you saw the rear-wheel drive GTI series, you know that we made a rear-wheel drive GTI using all-wheel drive parts. So today I'm going to share with you the insights we discovered during that video series over the course of a year. And yes, it took us a year to make that video series, even though it was launched all in 1 week. Let's start with, should you all-wheel drive swap your car? The answer is no. Absolutely not, you shouldn't. There is no reason to do this whatsoever. Most of the time, all-wheel drive swapping your car makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. In almost every circumstance, it's going to be more cost-effective and significantly less effort to sell your car and purchase a new car that already comes with all-wheel drive. That includes maybe even removing some of the old parts if your car is modded. But in case your kink is dirty fingernails, an empty wallet, and a significant other that hates you because you spend all of your time in the garage, here we go. The major parts you need for all-wheel drive swapping a car are an all-wheel drive transmission with a bevel box, front axles, a prop shaft, the prop shaft support brackets, an all-wheel drive rear suspension, a rear differential with Haldex, rear axles, a gas tank, a new exhaust, and a Haldex controller or integration of the Haldex system into your car. The best course of action for doing this swap is going to be to find a donor car, and that is assuming you're able to find one for the right price and the right type of vehicle to execute this build. Failing to do that could result in requiring additional hardware and different components that are small little pieces to be purchased separately, and that could add hundreds and hundreds of dollars to your build, maybe even more. Let's start with transmissions. In most circumstances, it's likely going to make the most sense for you to modify your current existing front-wheel drive transmission to accept the all-wheel drive parts. The 6-speed manual transmission that comes in most Mark 5, Mark 6, and Mark 7 models, the O2Q, can be modified to work as an all-wheel drive transmission under the right circumstances. The key that makes all-wheel drive possible on Haldex cars for VW and Audi is going to be the bevel box, often also called the transfer case. On the all-wheel drive differentials, you have an outer drive sticking out of the transmission that splines to the bevel box. On front-wheel drive cars, this isn't there, so what many would do in this circumstance is buy an upgraded limited slip differential for an all-wheel drive car, then install it into their front-wheel drive transmission. As long as your front-wheel drive trans has threaded bolt holes where the bevel box mounts to the transmission, you stick the bevel box on, and voila, all-wheel drive. If you go this route, you're going to need a bevel box or transfer case, probably used, and you're going to need a differential from an all-wheel drive car, which is generally going to be a performance upgraded limited slip one, which you're going to get from us, link in the bio, from someone like Wavetrac or some other business like that. Shout out to CEO Motorsports, who is able to confirm for me that the front-wheel drive ring gear on the differential would swap over to the all-wheel drive differential without any fitment concerns. For our rear-wheel drive GTI build, we used a Mark 1 Audi TT transmission, mostly due to the fact that it was more cost-effective and it was going to be more available to us because we knew with the stupid shit we were about to do that we were pretty sure making a rear-wheel drive car was gonna blow up immediately. Spoiler alert, it did. After we blew it up, people were then surprised that we didn't blow it up again, which we were too, and people were like, oh, it's gonna work now, and we don't expect it to last long, the way it is now. On that GTI, the Mark 1 TT transmission came with a few caveats that we ran across along the way. First, we needed to mill the transmission mount bracket to allow it to bolt up to the Mark 5 style transmission mount. Then we had to add a 5mm spacer between the engine and transmission because we found out the hard way that the depth of the TT transmission was a little too shallow. So when we bolted up the trans, it had bolts pushing on the pressure plate, locking the engine and transmission together. You can also buy a used transmission from something like a Mark 6 Golf R, which would be the correct application, or if it was a later model like a Mark 7, a Mark 7 Golf R. Since you are adding a bevel box to the passenger side of the transmission, you will need a new passenger side axle as it's going to be much shorter. Now the driver side axle, we believe from what we know, it's going to be okay to reuse your same axle. We don't actually know for sure though, because we never actually bolted in an axle because we were doing donuts in our swap. We didn't have any front axles. Rear axles are going to be obvious because you don't have them yet, so you need them. Regardless of front axles or rear axles, these are generally going to be pretty expensive, and depending on the application and the car and which car you're actually retrofitting this to, axles are probably going to range between $300 and about $700 per axle, which you can see 4 of them adds up to a lot of dollars very quickly. Throughout this video, I'm going to list some rough ideas of cost that I looked up for new parts versus eBay parts to show you why a donor car is probably the best option for you, and it probably doesn't even quite cover all the small details you would need to buy because you wouldn't have bolts and screws and brackets and all kinds of other things related to your build. Here are the prices for an all-wheel drive transmission with a bevel box, the price of a bevel box by itself, the front axles, and a Wavetrac differential. On to the prop shaft. If you have a donor car, easy enough. You have the prop shaft you need. If you don't, you will need to purchase a prop shaft that's going to be the correct length for your vehicle. On the Mark V, we could have gone with a drive shaft from a Mark V R32, a Mark VI Golf R, or an Audi A3. Depending on the car you're working with, you may have to get a shorter or longer drive shaft, and you may have to buy a new one, which is likely to result in empty pockets. To mount your prop shaft, you need to weld in these supports. They hold up the center support bearing on the prop shaft. Without these, well, you can't not have these because you wouldn't have a prop shaft, you'd have a flop shaft. Technically, you should remove the carver from your car to weld these in, because if you get through the body of the car, you could set your interior on fire. And the price on these parts for the prop shaft and the mounting brackets are as follows, but you will be able to get that from your donor car minus the brackets that you're gonna have to buy no matter what. Luckily, they're cheap. All-wheel drive rear suspension. The main part you need to get here is going to be the rear subframe. This allows you to mount the rear differential into the car. There were people on the internet who informed Max that a B6 Passat rear subframe and rear differential would fit in the car because they're all the same. And those people didn't know what the f they were talking about. Oh,
what? What's it hitting?
Fun fact, Passat subframes are
Not a direct fit.
not a direct fit. You would need one from a Mark V R32, a Mark VI Golf R, or an 8P Audi A3 model. Now apparently the Audi models all use aluminum rear subframes like the Passat one that we were trying to use, which would save you some weight if you had that one. For GTI models, you have to cut the spare tire well out and figure out a new solution to cover the hole in the floor. Most people would want to weld the trunk floor in from the donor car, but ours was drilled in the rear, so that was not an option. And when I say drilled, I mean just drilled like that. Not like, not that kind of drill. Most of the rear control arms are going to be reusable on the suspension, but you will need the rear sway bar, the rear spindles, the rear wheel bearings, and hubs from an all-wheel drive car because you need a hole for the axle to go in. Rear differential and Haldex units are going to need to come from a Mark V R32, a Mark VI Golf R, or an 8P Audi A3. Some of the other cars that are going to have rear Haldex systems, like the Passat or the CC, are going to have a wider track width, which makes both the rear subframe different and the rear differential different. Ask us how we know that. And sometimes I learn things, then teach them to people. Like Passat Haldexes don't fit in Mark Vs.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. According to Max's research, which was clearly shitty research. It's worth noting that if you're planning to use a Haldex controller like we did, you are gonna need to know which generation of Haldex your car has. The Mark V and early Audi A3 models use Gen 2 Haldex, where the Mark VI Golf R and later Audi A3, facelift A3 models use the Gen 4. Don't ask me about the Gen 3 because apparently they skipped that one. To price our rear suspension components, we're gonna start by looking at the rear subframe, the rear axles, the rear differential, which is a doozy if you're buying new, and the rear spindle and wheel bearing assembly. Gas tanks. The gas tank for your car is going to need to be very specific. For the Mark V GTI we were working with, the only options we would have would be the Mark V R32 or the Mark VI Golf R. Any of the other cars that have a similar setup would probably bolt up, but there would be concerns around the location of the filler neck and if they would mount in the right place. Another option for somebody, depending on the application you're looking to do, is you could add a fuel cell in the trunk if that was a route you were looking to go and you didn't want to actually mount an actual gas tank from a different car. You could always buy a fuel cell. There are a few modifications when it comes to the gas tank you need to make. One of them is going to be cutting a hole in the floor on the opposite side where the fuel pump currently is, because on the all-wheel drive one, it's going to move to that side, so you have to be able to access that. You also need to add threads into the body of the car to allow you to bolt up the strap for the gas tank. Related to the gas tank, you are going to have to address the evap system if you're planning on keeping it intact. On our car, we didn't mess with this. This is a leak detection pump. This is what tells your gas tank whether it's leaking or not. So yeah, this is so you don't leak fuel everywhere and explode your car.
Oh.
We're getting rid of it. But I know the guys at CO Motorsports are doing a swap for a customer, and they intend on keeping the EVAP system. We'll link to their YouTube channel where they are also in the middle of an all-wheel drive swap for a customer in the description below. And to price the gas tank, it is fairly expensive. You're not going to be able to buy one on eBay or any place like that. You will be able to potentially source one at a local junkyard, but that would be the only place you're going to get them, because shipping a fuel tank is going to be something that if it had a fuel in it previously, you're not going to be able to get anybody to ship it. So at this point, you'd want to decide what brakes you're going to be installing on the rear of your vehicle. Now, the factory all-wheel drive cars are usually going to come with vented brakes, which look like this, and whereas most GTIs or cars you're going to be swapping are going to have solid rear rotors, which look like this. Vented rear rotors are better for cooling, and this would be the preferred version, assuming your rear brakes and calipers and carriers are also going to be coming with your donor car. Your catback exhaust is useless now. You can throw it in the trash can. Best case scenario, you can chop it up and modify it to try to make it work, but the exhaust system for your car is going to have a completely different route now that you have drive shaft and a differential and all kinds of other things, so that's no longer viable. You also can't use your donor car exhaust because you're also going to not have the rear bumper that they have, so your muffler and all these other components won't have tips in the right place, so you'll have to either modify that or get a custom exhaust made to work with your swap. For price on exhaust, since it's going to be something custom, you're going to have to find somebody local to fabricate one. I would expect it to be somewhere in the probably 500 to 1,000 range, depending on who's doing it and the type of materials they're using. Controlling your Haldex system. Since Haldex is not full-time all-wheel drive, you'll need something to control it that tells it to turn on and off. In our circumstance, we used a manual Haldex controller. If you don't want to be awesome like us and purchase the Haldex controller from shop.app.com, you can integrate the Haldex system directly into your car through the wiring. I don't have any details about that because we didn't do that. So I know it is possible. It has other complications, but that is an option for you. You'll have to see if there's some forum support to maybe assist with that. For Haldex, this is going to be the cost if you go with the system that we went with. This makes it much easier. If you are integrating into the car, all of the other components, the module and stuff like that, would have come with it, so there wouldn't be a cost, but you would have to figure out how to integrate it into the car, which adds additional layers of complication. Here are a few things that I think potentially, if you want your car to function fully factory, that you're gonna have to deal with on an all-wheel drive swap that we didn't do, so we don't have any details about. ABS systems and integrating that to make sure the traction control functions with your Haldex system. Haldex system, so your car will actually know that it exists and know when to activate it when needed. Heat shields, you're gonna need to transfer them over if you wanna keep them intact. We didn't use them because our car had a bunch of modifications, but you would want to transfer them over from the donor car to keep everything guarded safely. Now to summarize costs for an all-wheel drive swap, roughly the parts all separate, you're looking at about $4,200 was our rough estimate if you bought it used, and it would obviously take time for you to do that. That probably would include shipping and a bunch of other stuff. The key is, if you were to buy that way, you are going to end up getting nickel and dime to death with every little nut and bolt and things like that. I would suspect to plan for a minimum of $1,000 in different hardware and other components, things like gas tank straps that you would need to buy that you wouldn't buy if you had a donor car like we had, along with a variety of other things, tools to do nutserts into the body and all kinds of other things like that. So I would say about $5,000 would be probably your total rough idea of parts for this, assuming you did not have a donor car. If you take a look here, this is a car that's currently for sale on Copart or will be up for auction in the near future. Current bid, $2,000, Mark 6 Golf R. This is a great car for a swap. I suspect this car will probably land somewhere in the $5,000 to $6,000 range once it's sold. That car would be ideal for this swap. You would have everything you need. Again, the list we put together was just a rough idea based on our experience. Because we didn't do certain integrations, things like the ABS module could be a concern, and if you were to have a car like that, you would have 100% of what you need for your swap and wouldn't have any concerns. Plus, you could sell the engine afterwards. So you could recoup some of that money. So that's all I can think in terms of roadblocks you might run into that we never dealt with. If you're still considering this all-wheel drive swap after all of this discussion, you may consider reaching out to your local therapist for a psych eval and a financial advisor to verify that this is a good choice for you.
It's not a good choice.
But it is cool. So I encourage you, if you are going to do it, good luck, have fun, and good night. Links to our rear-wheel drive video series in the description below. And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.